Hey AP Gov students, happy St. Patrick's Day and happy continuing through Unit 4. Today we're going to do 4.7 and 4.8. I apologize, no stick figure Madison in this one. I was going to put him in, but for sake of time, we'll see him next time. Or her, whoever Madison is. So 4.7 is ideologies of political parties. So before we start that, it's important to know what is a political ideology. So there's lots of different definitions that are maybe worded differently, but they're all basically the same thing. Is it's a set of ideas about how you think government should work and what the government should be doing. And there's all different types of ideologies. And there's different issues that these ideologies address. They can be valence issues. Valence issues are issues that most people all agree on, and the party's not going to find much difference on. For example, if you put on the New York Times today, the top story is once again about Ukraine and Russia. And all polls show that almost all Americans supporting the Ukraine. So the difference might be do they best think to support them. But supporting Ukraine would be an example of a valence issue. Now, a position issue would be when parties think something different. Like maybe the parties will eventually have different ways they think supporting that should be. There's some suggestion to that now, but it's not like set in stone. A wedge issue would be something that sharply divides issues. Abortion can sometimes be a wedge issue. There's really those hot topic issues. And then saliency issues are ex- one to a particular group that they find it extremely important. So abortion might be extremely important to women of childbearing age. Maybe Social Security is more important to people of an older generation, right? Maybe issues concerning college loans are going to be more important to people closer to your age. So that would be saliency issues. Then we can look at an ideological spectrum. Now, you can find a lot of these online. I don't know if any of them are perfect, but they give pretty good ideas. So you often hear are you left of center or right of center? So lefts would tend to be more liberal, and right of center would tend to be more conservative. So a little bit about testing ideas here. When you answer an FRQ, make sure you pay attention to, are they asking for to identify the ideology or the political party? Because that's two different things. Notice this does not say Republican, Democrat, whatever, Green Party, any of that. So to cover your bases, sometimes it's helpful just to say liberal Democrats or conservative Republicans. That way, if you don't know which one they're asking, you sort of have all of your bases covered. It's important to know that that's not binary. However, you can consider yourself liberal but not consider yourself a Democrat, or you can consider yourself conservative but not consider yourself a Republican, right? You can be a Republican who does have lots of liberal ideas, or vice versa. Um, it's not as common, but it's like there's no rules, right? Everyone can, just because you believe in one party does not mean you have to believe 100% in every aspect of the political platform. There might be, well, I agree mostly with them, but not with this one thing. Always remember what Patton said: if everyone thinks the same, then someone's not thinking. All right. Um, so let's look at some of the ideas. Liberals are usually more open to a more flexible government that can sort of be more responsive and engage in the issues. Conservative, they usually want a little bit less government intervention, more for following tradition, and more of a reverence for authority. Once again, these are broad things. It doesn't have to, um, it's not 100% across the board. Um, and, there's other issues that might be more common for some than others. So, for example, climate change is probably more of an issue concerning liberals. Um, Being pro-choice, gun control, right? Whereas conservative, bigger issues might be things like considering themselves pro-life or pro-Second Amendment, or just having fewer government regulations in general. You also have some other ideologies. The populists Um, they're for more of a strict moral code and traditional values, favors things like workplace safety. They oppose unpatriotic speech. And you may also hear of libertarians um, who oppose all government intervention, or at least oppose as much government intervention as possible, and have a high regard for civil liberties. Um, the progressives have its roots back into the early 1900s. It emerged in the cities from the Republican Party at the time. They criticized a lot of traditional political establishments, and thought that too much power in one place could be bad. You'll learn a lot about the progressives in a push. Now, earlier in this unit, we talked about different values that all Americans, most Americans, embrace regardless of party. Things like individualism, equality of opportunity, rule of law, limited government. So one thing people can sort of do is like, well, which one of those values, like how would Republicans or Democrats rank them in order? And usually the consensus is liberals would place equality of opportunity as their priority, whereas conservatives might rank free enterprise. That doesn't mean that liberals don't believe in free enterprise or that conservatives don't believe in equality of opportunity. They just sort of might think, different ones is their number one issue. All right. So we look at some of the Republican Party issues, um, all sorts of things. I think, did we mention some of them already? Um, Things like being more in favor of the death penalty, um, against all forms of abortion. Like I said, the Second Amendment. Democrats tend to be more in favor of things like finding more universal health care, equal rights, especially for like the LGBTQ community, um, more wanting to do things about climate change, believing in the right to choose, all sorts of things. So we'll learn a little bit more about this in Unit 5 as well. All right, but let's jump to 4.8, which is ideology and policymaking. So having all these platforms and ideas is great, but what are you going to do about it, right? Got to do something. So we're going to learn about public policy, what influences it, and how does it form. So public policy are the laws and principles on which our society is based. They can be domestic, economic, social, foreign, whatever. And they impact those ideologies that we just discussed, impact what policy will be made. So, just for fun here, I found this opinion piece from quite a while ago, 2006, in the New York Times. But like, who doesn't like learning about marshmallows? And this study, you can read this real quick and maybe look up the article about giving young children marshmallows in different ways and how they responded, and then what traits they became. And it's the idea that we can make all the public policy we want, but we have to sort of keep in mind human nature and how human beings respond to things. So that is a transition to just how does public policy form, right? The first thing is that a person or a group of people like, I have a problem, something needs to be fixed here. So that's recognition. After recognition, we have formation. Okay, was this a ripoff of Beyonce's Formation? You decide. Okay, so after the public brought the attention to their legislators and discussed it, then the legislators start to have to study it, and they sort of form a paper on it, and they present it to Congress, and then it's debated, and eventually that would go to the president. And then we have implementation. Okay, so it's recognized, it's formed, it's implemented. That's given to the proper agency. Remember when we learned about all those bureaucratic agencies? And they create rules and regulations on this policy. And then it gets evaluated. All right, so the agency evaluates its effectiveness. Sometimes congressional oversight can take place to see if it works or not. And it can go to a committee if need be. If it is successful, does it need funding, right? It always comes down to money. And then they can sort of reevaluate it and go from there. And this happens in a cycle, right? You can go online and see lots of different Google policymaking cycles, and there's a lot of different ones, but they're all fairly similar. So it would start with the people, right? The people say, hey, we have this problem. They bring it to Congress. Then institutions Maybe certain groups are like, yeah, we want to get on board with this policy. We'll talk to Congress too. Then the policy is decided, right? It's sent to the agency. Policy is enforced, right? Then it's supported. Maybe people get taxed to support this policy. Who knows what? Then that policy is going to impact the people, and whether good or bad. And then the people are going to react, and it keeps going around in cycle and cycle. All right, so what influences these policies? We have majoritarian policy making. So basically, in Congress, the majority of the people are going to impact what policies what be made. But remember, we always have to worry about the rule of the minority when majorities are making these decisions. That's where, after interest groups have their influence on what policy should be made, we have to always remember about balancing liberty and order, right? You just can't make any policy. We have to make sure people's liberties, even if it's in the minority, are respected and that it also protects order. We need to talk a little bit about iron triangles and issue networks. So, iron triangles in policymaking, think of these as like pretty close to permanent. That doesn't mean they're going to be around forever, but for a really long time. And they include Congress, they include interest groups, and they include those bureaucratic agencies once again. And you can think of something that the most common example is the military industrial complex, right? Congress has committees that deal with the military, and they can do all sorts of things, and they can declare war and all sorts of things. Um, but then the actual military, being part of this agency, right, is involved. And then you have interest groups, which could be contractors or weapons manufacturers, right? And they seem to be like you might hear it like the military industrial complex, right? They're not an officially part of like the government, but it's a pretty much an ironclad network. Now, an issue network could be something that's not as intense as the military industrial complex. It might be there's an issue and they work for a while to get it solved, and then it might fade away. Maybe it comes back as that issue becomes an issue again. All right. So, things to take away is that public policy impacts all people, even if you're not there, like petitioning or protesting for policy change. Policy affects you. And in order for change to happen, this is not a process that takes overnight. It's lengthy and it can take a while, but it happens. All right. Talk more in class, guys. See ya.